The onus of supporting Ukraine in its long-standing war against Russia is evidently going to fall on Europe. The bloc's dependence on the United States for security is forever wrapped in melancholic uncertainty until it doesn't stand up to the occasion. The obvious context here is the possible return of Donald Trump and his apathy towards Europe's security anxieties. So the response emanating from Europe hinges on the catchphrase Trump-proofing and has two complementary vectors. One, Europe militarizing itself, and two, providing military support to Ukraine. Now, there has been enhanced involvement of individual European actors and the European Union in the Russia-Ukraine war since the delay in the United States aid package to Kyiv. In this regard, Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, recently proposed creating a 100 billion military fund for Ukraine and offered coordinating military aid to it as well. These are path-breaking departures from NATO's earlier role in the Ukraine war that, till now, was restricted to providing non-lethal aid for the fear of escalation. This move will also make NATO more directly involved with taking over operational responsibilities of coordinating military assistance provided by member states, which until now was spearheaded by the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Ramstein in Germany. It is a coalition with more than 50 countries responsible for providing 99% of all military aid to Kyiv. This proposal comes months before NATO's upcoming summit in Washington in July, where key priorities for the alliance will be discussed at length as it celebrates its 75th anniversary this year. All these developments suggest that finally NATO is also doing its own bit in Trump-proofing the European theatre, lest the US presidential elections perpetuate the uncertainty in the air into tangible hindrances. And this will mean a different interface with the Ukraine war. Like I said, so far the alliance has steered clear of directly supporting Ukraine. Money to Ukraine doesn't go from NATO's budget, but from individual member states. With this new proposal on board, the member states would have to discuss various mechanisms and they will have to dwell on the question of whether or not individual bilateral assistance should be included in the overall amount and things like that. Now, the latest Trump-proofing efforts made by NATO complement at least 6 other endeavors happening at different verticals across the European theatre. So, what are the 7 verticals of Trump-proofing? First, I just mentioned are the efforts made by NATO. But what are the other 6? Let me tell you one by one. Second is the finalization of individual security agreements with Ukraine. After the UK, France, and Germany, Finland has become the 8th NATO country to have concluded almost identical and long-term, at least 10 years, security treaties with Ukraine. They have pledged financial support, military aid, defense industry cooperation at least. Now, although bilateral security arrangements with Ukraine were finalized at NATO's Vilnius summit in 2023, but Ukraine's NATO dream doesn't seem round the corner at all this year. Third, in 2023, the EU had pledged to produce 1,155,000 shells by spring this year. Now, behind schedule and facing real-time problems in coordinating its defense industries, the European Union now seems confident to deliver 1.5 million shells by the end of 2024. Now, giant defense industries across the continent are expanding and returning to artillery production. The lack of ammunition, as you may have noticed, is bringing major changes in Kyiv's war tactics. With less ammo to fire on the battlefront, Ukraine is attacking deeper into Russian territories, targeting their logistics and hydrocarbon reserves. Ukraine's strikes on Russia's naval capabilities in the Black Sea region have also been increasing in scale and frequency. However, the delay in ammunition reinforcement has been detrimental to Ukraine's defense of its front, where a slow retreat has been underway, as the risk of frontline collapsing grows by the day. That is how Ukraine left Avdiivka. Fourth is the introduction of the Czech-led initiative for the purchase of ammunition from outside the European Union. More than 15 countries have raised approximately 1.8 billion euros as part of this initiative, which was proposed by Czech President Peter Pavel at the Munich Security Conference in February this year. He had claimed that he had found 500,000 155mm and 300,000 Soviet-era 122mm shells outside of Europe. Now, with the purchase completed, the shipment will reportedly be delivered to Ukraine this month. Fifth is the release of the EU's first defense industry strategy, the EDIS, in March this year. This strategy states a clear long-term vision to achieve defense industrial readiness in the EU by coordinating member states' investments, by boosting research, and by building better resilience in the defense supply chains. Now, under this initiative, the EU has decided to open an office for defense innovation in Kyiv as well. Now, broadly speaking, the three main targets set out by 2030 include joint purchases of 40% of the defense equipment, prioritizing products made in Europe, and trading at least 35% of defense equipment at an intra-EU level and not for foreign customers. Now, for a bloc with state-of-the-art defense industries with global focus for decades, this could mean an overhaul of sorts. Where the EDIS gets it right is simultaneously creating a regulation which is called the European Defence Industry Programme, the EDIP, to start implementing the concrete measures that are identified in the EDIS or the strategy. The success of the EU's long-term plan to support Ukraine by revitalizing its defense industry base is going to rely on how well the EDIS and the EDIP work in tandem. Sixth, the EU is mulling to bypass the treaty ban to buy military equipment for Ukraine. The EU treaty clause, Article 41(2), stops the EU common budget from funding military purchases. Until now, the process by which the bloc was securing military aid for Ukraine was quite historic in its own right, but it was an off-budget instrument called the European Peace Facility, the EPF. And this EPF had bypassed Article 41(2). Moreover, the EPF remains a cumbersome process as it requires negotiating 27 member states afresh every time a replenishment is needed or a change is needed. So what is underway today in Brussels is a debate on the legal interpretation of Article 41(2) between the EU's legal service, that is quite bullish on the proposal, and the European Commission's lawyers, who are pretty conservative on it. The Commission has actually proposed a joint legal task force to examine this issue better. And finally, the seventh is the setting up of the Ukraine facility. In February 24, the EU Council and the Parliament agreed on a new support mechanism called the Ukraine Facility, the UF, committing $50 billion under the new single dedicated instrument to support Ukraine's reconstruction and modernization, while also supporting its accession path to the EU. The UF, the Ukraine Facility, operates on three pillars that include plans for reconstruction and modernization, investment framework in the form of budgetary guarantees through grants and loans, and accession assistance measures. But this Trump-proofing is a bumpy road ahead. At the level of optics, this is indeed the West signaling Russia that it is not letting Moscow outlast Kyiv's allies. While the reality is clouded with oodles of rhetoric, Europe's support for Ukraine today stands on these 7 interrelated verticals. Now, of course, not all could be equally effective or equally successful, but taken together, they do make a compelling case for the European endeavor to fend for its own security. However, back home, these efforts and their execution need to be agreed upon by all the member states in the EU and NATO. A modus vivendi therein is easier said than done, as all member states do not have the same opinion, either on Russia or on supporting Ukraine. There will be an undeniable factor of Hungary and its own relationship with both Moscow and Beijing. though not at the cost of losing either NATO or the EU membership, but enough to delay the process of making speedy decisions for Ukraine. Then there are upcoming elections in the EU, and Budapest, that is Hungary, will be holding the rotating presidency of the EU Council from June to December 2024, which might also adversely impact the execution of these plans. The lack of coordination between major European powers like Germany and France that are still not able to fulfill their basic NATO commitments also remains anything but encouraging. Therefore, whether Europe, supported by NATO, will be able to Trump-proof in time remains to be seen. The link to my column is shared in the description box with many more references. Do take a look. I will be back to discuss this and more. Stay tuned.